Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
On this episode, real-life encounters with the unusual, the inexplicable, and the downright terrifying. The Shadowland radio show presents The World of Shadows. The following is a story related by a man who wanted to be known only as Steve. I was showing my friend around the swamp where I'd found a lot of cool minerals, including black quartz. This was at night. First, while we were walking down the muddy banks, suddenly I heard something faint somewhere above us. I told my friend to shut up and told him to listen. Then we looked up to see something big and dark swoop into a tree and hit something or get something. We heard a weird sound like a mouse mixed with a crocodile. Shrieky but low-pitched. He was about to offer to leave, as I found out later, when he suddenly told me to stop pushing him. I reminded him that I was in front of him, meaning that if I pushed him, I'd slip down the steep bank. Suddenly, I felt a shove on my left shoulder from a hand about 2.5 times as big as his. I almost fell before I grabbed a branch that my hand passed by. That's when my friend asked me where I was and said we should switch on my flashlight now. I did so, then got back to my feet. Again, I felt that big hand on my shoulder. This time, I thought it was my friend. I spun around, lost my footing for a second. I was awed by 2 huge red circles staring at me, so I shined the flashlight at it. My friend and I saw a huge black creature with metal-like claws covering its eyes from the flashlight. It had an odd human appearance to it, but with scales. It gave a shriek like the one we heard before. My friend grabbed its arm. It spun around, flinging him about 2 feet back with one of its claws. It then swiftly ran forward, hopped onto a tree, and like nothing we'd ever seen before, it jumped from tree to tree. Later, we found out that its claw had actually left a scar about 2 to 3 inches. The next account, given to us by Lisa, relates a young woman's brush with supernatural forces. A few years ago, while lying in bed at night, I woke up and saw a girl, probably about 18 years old or so, standing in front of the door looking at me. She was somewhat startled that I saw her. Apparently she didn't expect me to see her. Folded her arms, she said, "Oh, I'm just here looking for something. Go back to sleep." I thought she was someone who came in from outside, but how could that be when all the doors and windows were locked? She was barefoot and wore a white short-sleeved gown that went down to her ankles and had snowflake patterns on the center area. She was standing in front of my bedroom door and was probably a few feet away from me. She looked real enough. When she told me to go back to sleep, I saw her lips move, but heard the voice in my head, if that makes any sense. She had pitch black hair in a ponytail fashion and very white skin. The pupils of her eyes had a strange orange-like color. She reminded me of someone I saw when I was 9 years old. I was 21 at the time of this encounter. But when I was 9, I saw a girl spinning around in front of me while I was sitting on the bed. While she was spinning, some gold dust came off of her, and it gave me a feeling of contentment and happiness. I wonder if this was the same person. I wonder who she is. Here's another fascinating incident in which ordinary people encounter unexplainable spirit forces. One day when I was a teen, I was walking home from school. The path that I took led me down a city sidewalk right next to my sister's house. She lived in a corner house with her basement door facing the sidewalk. As I approached the house, I noticed that the basement door was standing open. I did not think this was strange because it was an old house, and they had been making some repairs to it at the time. But just as I walked past the door, I heard a very profound sound. 3 loud bangs. They were evenly spaced. They were deep in tone. Each bang had a resonance of equal length. It did not sound like it was produced by a hammer. It seemed to shake the entire house. I remember thinking it was odd, but I was in a hurry to get home, so I just dismissed it as someone working in the basement, and I kept on walking. But just as I got past the house, my sister came running out of the house screaming. She had been on the first level of the house when the 3 bangs occurred. She said that the sound came from the second level of the house and that it engulfed the entire house. She said she was sure it came from a supernatural source. Prior to this, she had heard footsteps and other unexplained noises in the house. Also, her dog would often leap to his feet and run into the kitchen and begin barking at nothing, as if it were someone there. We believed the house had a spirit in it, and that the spirit had something to do with the 3 bangs. In another story, a girlfriend of mine once told me of 3 knocks she heard on the front door of her house. She lived in the house with her mother and father. The knocks occurred the night of her mother's death. Just after her mother had passed in the house, she heard 3 knocks on the front door. When she opened the door, there was no one there. What, if any, is the significance of the 3 knocks? I feel that it does signify something. Here is a scary encounter presented to us by an anonymous contributor. When I was about 9 or 10, when my parents were still together, we were living in a really old house. It was 2 stories and it had a basement. The house always creeped me out. I know this will sound strange or stupid, but I was sort of psychic when I lived there. I would have these strange dreams, and then the next day something from the dream would happen. But I also had many nightmares there. In one particularly frightening nightmare, I was standing in my own room. My room was sort of bathed in dark blue shadows, so it was hard to see. There was nothing in my room except for the curtains on my 3 windows. I kept saying, "Who are you? What do you want?" And then I heard these 2 little kids' voices whisper. I couldn't tell what they were saying at first, but the whispers became loud, as if the kids were excited about something. Then I could hear them talking. I think they said something like, "She will help us. She can hear us," and repeating that, but it was still in loud whispers. I was afraid my parents would wake up. My dreams are the feel real kind, like if I trip over something in my dream, I will jerk awake, or if the wind was blowing, I can really feel it. I said again, "Who are you? Where are you? Are you trapped?" And then it was like they sent me a vision, 2 little kids inside my wall whispering to each other. I became really scared when I saw this, and I woke up. Almost every time I'm dreaming, I actually know it and try to wake up. When I woke up, I was lying on my side, facing the wall where the kids were in my dream. I became wide awake with fear as I stared at the wall. I could still hear the kids whispering, only quieter. A gentleman named Kevin provides us with the next incredible story. I have a favorite aunt named Juvie and a favorite uncle named Mick who lived in Rehoboth, Massachusetts, in a very nice and quiet area. I used to love sleeping over to her house because they were both young at heart and loved me and my brother and sister very much. My aunt worked first shift, which was 7 a.m. until 3 p.m. My uncle worked second shift from 3 p.m. until 11 p.m. So every time I slept over, he would leave for work at 2:15 and I would wait for my aunt to get home around 3:30. One day I was upstairs playing Nintendo and I heard her two doors open and slam shut. The doors were very old and heavy, so we would always hear people come in and out of the house. I thought my aunt had come home early from work. I could hear her come up the stairs. After a little while of not hearing her call me, I left the TV room and walked to the top of the stairs. I yelled out, "Aunt Juvie, are you home?" No response, so I didn't think anything of it. About 3 months later, around 9:30 p.m., my phone rang and my dad answered it. It was my aunt. My dad said she was screaming and crying. She was watching TV upstairs and heard the doors open and footsteps going up the stairs, just like I did, and thought it was my uncle coming home from work early. She told my dad she called my uncle's work and he was still there. I told my dad that I heard the same thing one day when I was alone in the house. My aunt wanted to find out what was going on in that house because now she was getting harassed by that ghost every day. She would walk down the stairs and it would keep banging the wall right behind her head. She contacted the old owner of the house and found out that the now 27-year-old girl who lived there with her mother used to see this ghost every night in her bedroom. It would appear in the corner just staring at her. This was the guest room that I had always used to sleep in. Paranormal researchers are quite familiar with sightings of imposing hooded entities. What follows is a related account by Lucas J. of Atlanta, Georgia. This happened to me when I was about 12 years old. My family and I live in a very small house in Atlanta. I slept in the living room, and right next to my room was the laundry room where my older brother slept. The laundry room had a wooden floor, ceiling, and walls. The laundry room was very small, and about all it had room for was my brother's bed and a chair that he kept next to his bed. I slept on a bunk bed on the top bunk, and when I was lying in my bed, I could see inside of my brother's room. One night I woke up at about midnight. Everybody else in the house was asleep. I remember feeling very afraid the instant that I woke up. Mind you, I know that I was not asleep. I looked into my brother's room, and in the darkness I thought I saw somebody sitting in the chair by his bed. Surely this cannot be, I thought to myself. I tried to look at whatever this was as just a pile of clothes, like my mind was playing tricks on me. But no matter how I looked at it, all I could see was what looked like a person wearing a hood, like a cloak, staring at my brother. I kept staring at it, and I guess it knew I was looking at it because it turned to look at me. I could not see any facial features, just evil darkness. I promptly laid back down in my bed. I was petrified. Cold sweat dripped from my pores, and I trembled uncontrollably. Then I heard a sound, the sound of a chair scooting back across the wooden floor. Damn it, I thought as I heard footsteps coming toward me. My room had carpet in it, by the way. I heard footsteps on a wooden floor, then heard them on a carpeted floor, my floor. I pulled the covers over my head. I could feel this thing standing right next to me. I got very, very cold. I was horrified. When I finally mustered the nerve to sit up and confront the thing, it was morning. What has always bothered me is that I know this happened around 12 or 1 a.m. And when I sat up, the sun was out. I know that I wasn't dreaming. What happened during those 5 or 6 hours? Elizabeth G. provides a great little account of a ghost encounter in the Scottish Highlands. About 10 years ago, a friend and I went to visit Duffus Castle in Morayshire, Scotland. It was a rather grey evening with a cool wind. The castle is situated on a mound rising out of flat land and is approached along a straight road. We parked the car at a car park near the way, just a gate and a fence. But when we got to the gate, we decided that it was too cold and that we'd visit another day. There was one other car in the car park, and we saw the occupants up on the mound. As we walked back to the car park, I saw a man in the middle distance walking toward us along the road. We got into the car I was driving, and I looked in the rear mirror before starting the engine. I saw that the man was almost at the entrance to the car park and said to my friend, "I'll just wait till this chap goes past." The man wore the clothes of a farm laborer with green Wellingtons. I waited for him to come into my peripheral view. Nothing happened. I looked around and he had disappeared. What is odd about this is there was nowhere for him to disappear to. There were no buildings or bushes or solid fences within several hundred yards, apart from the castle on the mound above. I have subsequently seen an aerial photograph of the site, and this confirms my recollection that there was no cover at all. My friend also saw the man as we walked to the car. He looked very un-ghost-like. Could it be a simple case of a rent in time and space? In other words, he was somewhere else at the time. Phil H. contributed this remarkable account of his brush with otherworldly forces. I was living with a girlfriend in southern Ontario, Canada back in 1987 and lived there until 1991. We had been asked to accompany some of my work acquaintances for a dinner out on New Year's Eve, 1990. After shaving, showering, and generally preening, I was looking in the mirror, straightening my tie, and stared at my reflection in disbelief. My girlfriend also saw what I did. Strange marks had appeared on my forehead in the pattern of a circle, and long, deeper marks I can only describe as indents. It was as if my forehead was made of plasticine and somebody had taken a pin cap or nail and scratched something onto my skin. The circle was almost dead center on my head, and what seemed to be dots or very small letters or numbers inside. This circle has only appeared rarely. The longer scars or scratch-like indents appear still to this day and at random, and I can be anywhere or doing anything. Strangely enough, few people have noticed when they appear, and often when I point this out to those I am close to, they almost instantly vanish. But I do have witnesses. I have tried photographing this phenomena to no avail. It never turns out clearly enough, but I'll keep trying. I don't really feel any different when this occurs, but it does give me the spooks at times. I wish I knew what was really happening and why it happens. Perhaps it is some connection with the occult-type dabblers that have passed through my life, that I unwillingly attracted myself, being an artist of sorts. I'm not against anyone interested in the occult, but I feel that perhaps someone is or has taken an offense or disliking to me for some reason. Could it be a spiritual attempt at contacting me somehow? Casey A. went public with this story in an attempt to cope with the lasting impact that this unexplainable event has had on her. This happened to me when I was 17 in southern Missouri, near the small town of Forsyth. My cousin and I were staying the weekend at a cabin that our family owns in the Mark Twain National Forest. It was about 10:30 at night, and we were just sitting in the back room playing PlayStation and talking. Suddenly, my cousin sat up with a frightened look on his face and turned around and looked out the window behind us. I asked him what was wrong, and he said something was looking at us from outside the window. Normally, I would have laughed it off because of his past history of playing pranks and goofing around, but his face was as pale as a corpse. Alarmed, I asked him what it looked like. He said he saw it only for a second and didn't get a good look, but it wasn't human looking at all. He said that when the TV screen went black to load the next stage of the video game, he could see the reflection of the window on the screen. A few moments later, my dog, a large Rottweiler, began barking and growling in the front room. We ran out there and he was frozen solid, staring at the door, growling. I was scared by this time. We stood and stared at the door for a few minutes and nothing happened. I went to the bedroom and grabbed my .22 rifle I brought along. I walked over and slowly opened the front door and told my dog to get him. Normally this dog would have rushed outside and raised hell with whatever was out there, but he just stood there whimpering and cowering by me. He would not get within 5 feet of the door. After about 5 minutes of trying to get my dog to go out, we heard something on the roof. It sounded like something ran from the back of the house to the front. I was scared to death, but curious. We worked up enough courage to walk out onto the front deck. The front deck has a large overhang and sits about 5 feet off the ground. We stood on the deck for a few moments. We saw something from the corner of our eyes drop from the roof to the ground and heard it go under the porch. I said something along the lines of, "Is someone there? I have a gun. You better leave us alone." Then I heard the most frightening sound I've ever heard in my life. Whatever it was under the porch let out a high-pitched scream that lasted only a few seconds. We quickly ran back inside. We continued to hear whatever the thing was outside scurry around outside the cabin. None of the windows in the cabin had blinds or curtains, which made me feel twice as uneasy. We stayed in the cabin the rest of the night with the lights on, sitting in a corner away from the windows with the gun fully loaded and ready to fire on this thing if it decided it wanted to come inside. We heard a lot of scratching sounds coming from the back door and sounded like the doorknob was trying to turn. We heard more scratching coming from the back room where we were earlier. Finally, the noises stopped, and we heard nothing for about 4 hours. We continued to wait until the sun came up. It had been daylight for about 2 hours. We went outside and looked around the cabin. On the back door there were deep scratch marks, and also on the window of the back room there were deep scratch marks on the window pane. We could not find any footprints because it was fall and there were leaves all over the ground. We packed up our stuff and left in a hurry. Later I asked my cousin to describe what he had seen in the window. He said that he didn't get a good look, but it was a tannish brown color with beady black eyes, no hair, and sharp teeth. He said that it was grinning at him when he saw it. He said about as soon as he turned around and looked, it quickly ducked down. This is something that is burned into my mind for the rest of my life. Just recalling all this has given me that same feeling of terror I had years ago. Until now, I've never shared this story with anyone, not even my family. My cousin and I haven't spoken of it since that day. I figured I would share it here because everyone here has had similar experiences and would not call me insane. And that concludes another edition of the Shadowland radio show. Thank you for listening to the program. I want to remind you that the show can be heard on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel. It can also be heard on the Blackwater Media Facebook page, Pinterest, and Google+. When you go to the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, remember to like, subscribe, and share. I'm Dr. William Lester reminding you that I will see each and every one of you again on the flip side.